My name is Julian Hayes, and for the past 7 years, I've lived a life most people only dream about. I'm an entertainer aboard the Celestial Empress, one of the largest cruise ships in the world. Every night, I step onto that glittering stage, microphone in hand, and perform for hundreds of passengers from every corner of the globe. The applause, the spotlights, the endless ocean stretching beyond the ship's rails. It's intoxicating. It's everything I ever wanted. But there's something else. Something I need to tell you before we go any further. Some passengers aboard the Celestial Empress never leave. I don't mean they book back-to-back cruises or become regulars, though we get plenty of those. I mean, they never physically leave. They check in, they attend shows, they walk the decks. But they never disembark. Not in Miami, not in Barcelona, not anywhere. And the truly terrifying part? They've been doing this for decades, some of them for nearly a century. I've seen a woman in a pristine 1950s cocktail dress sitting in the same theater seat. Voyage after voyage. Year after year. I've passed a businessman in a brown polyester suit that went out of style before I was born, standing at the starboard railing every single morning at dawn. I've heard jazz music drifting from an empty lounge at 3 a.m., played by fingers that shouldn't exist. You think you know what it's like to work at sea? You don't. Not until you've felt their eyes on you during every performance. Not until you've realized that some passengers aren't just memorable. They're impossible. This is my story. The story of the passengers who never leave. And if you're listening, if you're planning a cruise vacation, you should know, once the ship knows you, once they know you might not leave either. I still remember my first day aboard the Celestial Empress. It was March 2018, and I stood on the crew gangway in Miami, staring up at the ship's massive white hull, rising 12 decks above me. The vessel was stunning. A floating city of glass and steel, stretching over 1,000 feet from bow to stern. I couldn't believe this was going to be my home. Vincent Cross, the entertainment director, met me at the crew entrance. He was a tall man in his mid-40s with salt and pepper hair and the perpetual tan of someone who'd spent decades at sea. "Welcome aboard, Julian," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "You're going to love it here. Best gig in the world." He wasn't wrong. That first week felt like a fever dream. The ship's main theater, the Constellation Lounge, was a marvel of red velvet seats and crystal chandeliers, with a stage large enough for full Broadway productions. My cabin was small but cozy, shared with Claire Morrison, a dancer from Atlanta with an infectious laugh and more energy than anyone I'd ever met. "First cruise?" she asked, unpacking her third suitcase of costumes. "That obvious? You've got that look. Like you can't believe you're getting paid for this." She grinned. "Don't worry. By week 3, you'll be complaining about the passengers just like the rest of us." But I didn't complain. Not then. Every port was a new adventure. Nassau, Cozumel, Grand Cayman. Every night I performed the welcome show to packed audiences, singing jazz standards and pop covers while the ship cut through Caribbean waters. The passengers were delightful. Elderly couples celebrating anniversaries, families with excited children, young honeymooners. There was the woman from Texas who requested "New York, New York" every single night. The British gentleman who somehow always got front row seats and fell asleep during every ballad. The teenage girl who shyly asked for my autograph after the show, blushing furiously when I signed her program. Normal, happy, everything was normal. 3 months passed in a blur of Caribbean sunsets and standing ovations. The initial thrill mellowed into comfortable routine. I knew every song by heart, every lighting cue, every spot where the stage creaked under my feet. The Celestial Empress stopped feeling like a novelty and started feeling like home. I grew close with the crew. Claire became my best friend, someone I could decompress with after long shows over contraband wine smuggled into our cabin. Derek Palmer, the crew services manager, would join us sometimes, sharing horror stories about demanding passengers and lost luggage. He had a dry British humor that made even the worst days bearable. But it was Marina Volkova who fascinated me most. The head bartender had worked cruise ships for 15 years, her accent a thick Russian drawl that softened after a few drinks. She'd seen everything: proposals, fights, medical emergencies, even a few deaths at sea. Nothing rattled her. She moved through the ship with the quiet confidence of someone who knew every corridor, every secret, every shadow. "You settling in well?" she asked one evening as I sat at her bar after the late show. "I think so. It's starting to feel, I don't know, familiar? Comfortable?" Something flickered across her face. "Comfortable is good. But stay alert, Julian. The sea, she plays tricks. This ship especially." I laughed it off. "What, like ghost stories?" Marina didn't laugh. She just polished a glass slowly, her dark eyes unreadable. "Not stories. Just pay attention. You'll understand soon enough." That same night, during my performance, I noticed her. An elderly woman in the 4th row, wearing an immaculate navy blue dress with pearl buttons. Something about her felt wrong, out of place. Like I'd seen her before, though I couldn't remember where. When I looked again, she was smiling at me. A knowing, patient smile. Like she'd been waiting for me to notice. I tried to shake off the feeling. Cruise ships attract all kinds of passengers. Maybe she was just a wealthy regular who booked the same seat every voyage. It wasn't impossible. But something about that smile lingered in my mind long after the curtain fell. 2 weeks later, she was there again. Same seat, same navy dress, same pearl buttons. I checked with Derek during our afternoon break. "4th row, center left," I said. "Elderly woman, really elegant. She's been on the last 3 cruises. Do we have a passenger manifest I could look at?" Derek pulled up the files on his tablet, scrolling through names. "What's her cabin number?" "I don't know, I keep seeing her at every show." He frowned. "Julian, we have different passengers every week. 7-day Caribbean circuit. Unless she's crew, she couldn't be on 3 consecutive cruises. I'm telling you, same woman, same dress, same seat." Derek showed me the manifest. 3 different names for that seat across the 3 voyages. None matched an elderly woman. All were families or couples. I stared at the screen, feeling something cold settle in my stomach. That night, I watched her throughout my entire performance. She didn't move, didn't check her phone like other passengers, just watched me with that patient, knowing expression. When I sang "Fly Me to the Moon," I could swear I saw her lips moving, mouthing every word perfectly. After the show, I decided to approach her. I walked down from the stage, heart pounding, and made my way to the 4th row. The seat was empty. Not just empty, pristine. Like no one had sat there all night. But I'd seen her. I'd watched her for an entire hour. On the armrest, barely visible in the dim light, was a single thing: a vintage program from 1955. The edges were yellow with age. 6 months into my contract, I started keeping a notebook. Not officially, just a small black journal I kept in my cabin. In it, I documented the impossible. The woman in the navy dress appeared on 7 consecutive cruises. 7. I knew because I marked each sighting with a date and seat number. Always 4th row, center left. Always that same patient smile. Derek couldn't explain it. The manifests showed different passengers every time. The Chen family, a honeymooning couple from Oregon, a group of college students. But I saw her. Then I noticed the others. A young couple, mid-20s, always dressed in matching white nautical outfits with gold anchor buttons. They sat in the Sunset Bar every evening at 7 p.m. holding hands, staring out at the ocean. I saw them on 4 different cruises. When I asked Marina about them, she just poured another drink and said, "The Hastings, don't bother them." The Hastings? That's what we call them. They've been here longer than me. There was a businessman, too. Older, maybe 60, wearing a brown polyester suit that screamed 1970s. Every morning at dawn, he stood at the starboard railing on deck 9, briefcase at his feet, staring at the horizon. He never spoke, never acknowledged anyone, just stood there. I became obsessed. I started checking passenger manifests compulsively, comparing faces to names. Nothing matched. The woman should have been cabin B447 last cruise, a family of 4 from Michigan. The couple should have been in A3 Bouteau, an elderly woman traveling alone. The businessman didn't exist on any manifest at all. One night after my show, I saw the woman in the lobby. She was standing near the grand staircase, admiring a painting of the ship. I approached quickly, before she could vanish. "Excuse me, ma'am?" She turned slowly, that knowing smile spreading across her face. Up close, her dress was immaculate. Not a wrinkle, not a stain. Too perfect. "Wonderful performance tonight, Julian," she said. Her voice was warm, grandmotherly. "Though I did prefer your interpretation of The Way You Look Tonight from the August 14th show. You added that lovely flourish in the bridge." My blood went cold. August 14th was 2 months ago. "How did you—" I stammered. "That show wasn't even on this cruise." Her smile never wavered. "I never miss your performances, dear. Never." I wanted to ask more, but my mouth had gone dry. When I blinked, she was gone. Simply vanished between one heartbeat and the next. Only the faint scent of old perfume lingered in the air, something floral and ancient. I found Claire in our cabin, scrolling through her phone. "Claire, I need to tell you something, and I need you to not think I'm crazy." She looked up, concerned. "What's wrong?" I told her everything, the woman, the couple, the businessman, the impossible sightings, the manifests that didn't match, the vintage program. As I spoke, I watched her face change from skepticism to something else, something like recognition. "The couple," she said quietly. "White nautical outfits. You've seen them?" "Julian, I've seen them on every single cruise since I started. I thought they were just really enthusiastic repeat customers." Her voice shook slightly. "But they never age. They look exactly the same as 9 months ago. Exactly." We sat in silence for a moment, the truth settling between us like fog. The next evening, Marina pulled us aside after her shift. "I heard you two talking last night, through the vents." She lit a cigarette, something she only did when stressed. "Come with me." She led us deep into the crew quarters to a storage room I'd never noticed. Inside, Derek and Thomas Webb, the captain's steward, were waiting. Thomas was in his 50s, weathered and serious, with eyes that had seen too much. "Welcome to the club," Thomas said, gesturing to chairs. "The unofficial club of crew members who've noticed the permanents." "The permanents?" I asked. "That's what we call them," Derek explained. "Yours, the passengers who never leave. We've been documenting them for years." Thomas opened an old leather journal, its pages yellowed and worn. Inside were drawings, notes, dates spanning back decades. "There are more than you've seen," he said grimly. "Many more." Thomas turned the pages slowly, revealing sketch after sketch. The woman in Navy, Eleanor they called her. The Hastings couple. The businessman, Gregory Walsh. But there were others. A child with a wooden sailor toy, a jazz musician in a pinstripe suit, a bride in a yellowing wedding dress. "How long have they been here?" Claire whispered. "Some since the ship launched in 2015, Marina said, but others, they're older, much older, like they transferred from previous vessels." "That's impossible," I said, though I no longer believed my own words. "3 nights ago," Derek interjected. "I was doing inventory in storage hold C. It was 2 a.m., locked and sealed. I heard footsteps. When I turned around, the businessman, Walsh, was standing there. Just standing, staring at me." "What did you do?" "I asked if he needed help. He said, 'I've been watching you work since '73. Then he pointed to a corner. Told me I'd find what I was looking for there." Derek's hands trembled slightly. There was a briefcase, covered in rust, waterlogged. Inside were ship documents from 1973, but Julian, this ship didn't exist in 1973. These documents were from a different vessel entirely, one that sank. The room felt suddenly colder. "Last week," Thomas added, "I saw Eleanor in the theater during a midnight safety check. She was sitting in her usual seat, alone in the dark. When I approached, she turned to me and said, 'You should tell Julian to be careful. He's becoming one of us.' Then she smiled and faded, like smoke." My stomach dropped. "What does that mean?" Thomas closed the journal. "It means they're watching you specifically, Julian. They're interested in you, and once they notice you," he paused, "once they notice you, you're marked. They'll never stop watching." Outside, somewhere on the ship, I heard it. Faint but unmistakable. The sound of a woman humming, "Fly Me to the Moon." Over the next hour, they showed us everything. The journal was a collective effort, passed down through crew members over the years. Some entries were typed and taped in. Others were handwritten in fading ink. Each page documented an encounter with the permanents. "We started this in 2016, Thomas explained, a year after the ship launched. But when we compared notes with crew from other vessels, we realized these entities, they're not tied to just one ship. They follow certain routes, certain waters." Marina lit another cigarette, her hands steady despite the subject matter. "The woman you call Eleanor? She's been documented on 5 different cruise ships over the past 30 years. Always the same dress, always the theater, always watching performers." "The Hastings couple appeared on the Caribbean Princess in 2001, Derek added, pointing to a faded photograph. "Then the Ocean Dream in 2008, now here, always together, always in white." Thomas turned to a page marked with a red ribbon. "This is our current count, the permanents we've identified on the Celestial Empress." The list was longer than I expected. Eleanor, 4th row, center left, Constellation Lounge. Navy dress, 1950s era. Friendly, observant, appears at evening shows. Gregory Walsh. Starboard railing, deck 9, dawn hours. Brown suit, 1970s era, speaks rarely, knows impossible details about crew. The Hastings, William and Margaret. Sunset bar, 7 p.m. nightly. White nautical attire, 1940s era. Never separate, never speak to others. Samuel Reeves, Jazz Lounge, after midnight. Pinstripe suit, 1920s era. Plays phantom piano, sometimes hums along to performances. Little Henry, various locations, often near crew quarters. Sailor outfit, wooden toy boat, age 7-8, Victorian era. Shy, rarely makes direct contact. The bride, name unknown, promenade deck, deck 7, midnight. Wedding dress, age indeterminate, 1960s style. Weeps silently, searching for something. The captain, name unknown. Bridge area, visible only to command staff. Full dress uniform, 1800s era. Observes navigation never interferes. And there were more. 15 names total. 15 impossible passengers who walked these decks, attended shows, existed in spaces they shouldn't occupy. They have territories, Marina explained. Favorite spots, Eleanor owns the theater. The Hastings claim the Sunset Bar. Little Henry wanders, but he prefers lower decks. Do they ever interact with each other? Claire asked, her voice small. Thomas shook his head. Rarely. They seem trapped in their own moments, their own loops. But lately, he hesitated. Lately they've been more active, more aware. Especially around you, Julian. Why me? We don't know. But performers seem to attract them more than other crew. Maybe because you're on display. Maybe because they were drawn to entertainment in life. Thomas closed the journal carefully. Or maybe because they're trying to tell you something. You want proof? Thomas reached under the table and pulled out a metal lockbox. We've been collecting evidence for years. Physical evidence that can't be explained away. He opened it carefully. Inside were objects that shouldn't exist. First, he laid out a photograph. It showed the Constellation Lounge in 1998. I recognized it from the old carpet pattern and outdated light fixtures. In the fourth row, center left, sat Eleanor. Same navy dress, same ageless face. The photo was dated on the back July 15th, 1998. This ship launched in 2015, Thomas said quietly. Next came Gregory Walsh's briefcase. The leather was water damaged, covered in a thin layer of salt residue. Derek opened it carefully. Inside were documents, passenger manifests, crew schedules, maintenance logs, all dated 1973, all bearing the name of a ship called the Atlantic Star. The Atlantic Star sank in 1974, Marina explained. Hurricane. 147 people died. Walsh was listed among the deceased. Claire's hand found mine, squeezing tight. Thomas produced more items. A vintage playbill from the Constellation Lounge dated 1955. Impossible, as the lounge was built in 2015. A child's wooden toy boat, found in a sealed storage room that hadn't been opened in 8 years. A wedding photograph showing the bride smiling beside a groom whose face was somehow blurred, dated 1962. Security footage, Derek said, pulling up his tablet. He showed us clips from various cameras throughout the ship. In each one, the permanents appeared and disappeared like static, walking through walls, sitting in occupied seats, standing in locked rooms. The timestamp would glitch whenever they manifested, jumping backward or freezing entirely. They're not ghosts in the traditional sense, Thomas said. They're more like recordings, echoes burned into the ship itself, but they're aware, they watch, they remember, and somehow they're getting stronger. He pulled out one final item, a crew photo from 2017. In the background, barely visible, stood Eleanor. She was watching the camera, watching us. She wasn't crew, Thomas whispered. She's never been crew. But she's in every group photo we've taken for the past 8 years. The revelation hung in the air like fog. For a long moment, none of us spoke. Then Claire broke the silence. What are they? Really? Marina stubbed out her cigarette. We've debated this for years. Some think they're ghosts, spirits of passengers who died at sea, refusing to accept death. I think there's something older, Thomas said. Maritime tradition speaks of them. Every ship has them. Every vessel that's sailed long enough. The sea remembers. Ships absorb the memories. They could be temporal echoes, Derek suggested. Moments in time that got stuck, replaying over and over, like a record with a scratch. But they interact with us, I argued. Eleanor knew my name. Walsh spoke to Derek. That's not just a recording. Exactly, Thomas said grimly. That's what makes them dangerous. They're aware, they learn, they adapt. Whatever they are, ghosts, echoes, something else entirely, they're conscious. And they're tied to the sea itself, not just this ship. Marina poured herself a drink. I think they loved the ocean so much in life that death couldn't take them from it. They're bound here by their own desire, by their refusal to leave. Or maybe, Claire whispered, the ship won't let them go. Maybe vessels like this absorb souls, keep them trapped. Thomas nodded slowly. There's a pattern we've noticed. The longer someone works on these ships, the more they see the permanence. The more the permanents see them. It's like, he struggled for words, like you're being recorded too. Your performances, your routines, your presence, it's all being absorbed, burned into the ship's memory. That's why Eleanor said I'm becoming one of them, I realized, my voice hollow. Yes, Thomas said. And the terrifying part? We don't know if you can stop it. Once the ship knows you, once it starts recording you, you might never truly leave either. After that meeting, everything changed. It was as if acknowledging the permanence had opened a door I couldn't close. They were everywhere now, impossible to ignore. The next night I performed my usual set in the Constellation Lounge. Eleanor sat in her seat, as always. But this time she wasn't alone. The Hastings couple occupied the back row. Gregory Walsh stood by the emergency exit. Little Henry sat cross-legged in the aisle, clutching his wooden boat. Samuel Reeves leaned against the bar, phantom fingers tapping an invisible piano key. They were all there, all watching me simultaneously. My voice nearly cracked during Moon River. I could feel their collective gaze, heavy and expectant. When I finished, the normal passengers applauded, but the permanents simply stared, unblinking. Then, in perfect unison, Eleanor began to clap. Slowly, deliberately, one clap every 3 seconds. The others joined her, the Hastings, Walsh. Even little Henry put down his toy to applaud. Their clapping was perfectly synchronized, creating an eerie echo that filled the theater long after the living passengers had stopped. The sound followed me backstage, fading only when I locked myself in my dressing room. On the mirror, written in condensation that shouldn't exist in a climate-controlled room, were the words, "You're learning." Claire found me 20 minutes later, shaking. "They were in our cabin," she whispered. I went back after my shift. The Hastings were standing at the foot of my bed, holding hands, just smiling at me. When I turned on the lights, they faded, but I could still feel them watching. Derek reported similar encounters. Walsh had appeared beside him during inventory, offering advice about shipments that hadn't arrived yet. 3 days later, those exact shipments came in, exactly as Walsh had described. Marina stopped sleeping. She said Samuel played his phantom piano every night now, the music drifting through the vents. Sometimes she heard him humming along, songs that hadn't been written yet, melodies from future cruises. Thomas discovered something worse. He'd been reviewing old security footage and found himself in videos from 2016. Not videos he remembered being in. Videos that showed him performing routine checks, walking corridors, speaking to passengers. But he hadn't joined the crew until 2017. "The ship is rewriting us," he said during our emergency meeting. "It's pulling us backward, making us part of its history. We're not just being recorded, we're being absorbed into its timeline." That night I found a vintage photograph slipped under my cabin door. It showed the Constellation Lounge from 1987. On stage, barely visible in the grainy quality, stood a performer. He had my face. My exact face. I'd never been born in 1987. Sleep became impossible. Every night I lay in my bunk, staring at the ceiling, listening to the ship's groans and creaks. Were those normal sounds, or footsteps in the corridor? Was that the air conditioning, or someone humming "Fly Me to the Moon"? Claire moved out. She couldn't take sharing the cabin anymore. Not after waking 3 nights in a row to find the temperature had dropped to 40 degrees. Frost forming on the windows, despite being in the Caribbean. Not after seeing the Hastings standing in our bathroom mirror, their reflections present when we weren't. My performances suffered. I forgot lyrics mid-song, missed cues. My hands shook so badly I could barely hold the microphone. Vincent noticed, pulled me aside after a particularly rough show. "Julian, are you sick? Do you need time off?" Time off. The phrase almost made me laugh. Time off from what? From the ship? From the permanence? Eleanor had made it clear they'd never stop watching, and according to Marina, leaving wouldn't help. Some crew members who'd quit still reported seeing them. In their homes, in their cars, the Hastings appearing in restaurant windows, Walsh standing in their driveways at dawn. "Once you're marked," Marina had said. "The sea doesn't forget." I started avoiding certain areas of the ship, stopped using Deck 7 entirely after seeing the bride there 3 times in one day, weeping silently, her wedding dress dragging behind her like grave cloth. Stopped going to the jazz lounge after finding Samuel sitting at the piano, actually playing it, the keys moving under invisible fingers, creating melodies that made my chest ache with inexplicable sadness. Derek found me one evening, sitting alone in the crew mess at 3 a.m. "You look terrible," he said, sitting across from me. "I can't do this anymore. I can't perform knowing they're all watching, learning me, recording me." "I know. But what choice do we have?" That was the worst part. There was no choice. My contract ran another 6 months. And even after that, even if I left, would I ever truly escape? Would I spend the rest of my life seeing Eleanor in crowds, hearing Walsh's voice giving me impossible advice, feeling the Hastings' cold presence in my home? The ship had claimed me, and I was beginning to understand I might already be one of them. Just too stubborn to realize I'd never left. I started exploring the ship late at night, trying to understand what we were dealing with. The Celestial Empress felt different in the dark hours, more alive somehow, more aware. The engine room was worst. I convinced a maintenance worker to let me down there at 2 a.m. The heat was oppressive, the machinery thundering. But beneath that industrial roar, I heard something else. Voices. Dozens of them. Layered and overlapping, speaking in languages I couldn't identify. When I asked the worker if he heard it, he just nodded grimly. "Always," he said. "Night shift hears them constantly. Phantom crew. They're down here working machines that don't exist anymore." I saw them. Shadowy figures, moving between pipes and turbines, their forms translucent but purposeful. They were performing tasks, turning valves, checking gauges, maintaining equipment. A ghost crew, keeping a phantom ship running alongside the real one. The chapel was equally disturbing. Every Saturday at midnight, a wedding ceremony replayed itself. The bride stood at the altar, bouquet in hand, waiting for a groom who never appeared. I watched her once, compelled by morbid curiosity. She went through the entire ceremony alone, vows spoken to empty air, a ring placed on an invisible finger. When it ended, she turned and looked directly at me. "Will you stay?" she asked, her voice distant and hollow. "Will you stay with us forever?" I ran, but the worst discovery was in the storage hold. Behind old furniture and forgotten cargo, I found passenger luggage. Hundreds of pieces, stacked impossibly high. Each bag had a tag with a name and date. The dates ranged from 1952 to last week. All the names belonged to the permanents. The ship was keeping their belongings, their memories, their very essence. We weren't just being watched. We were being collected. 7 years. 7 years, I have performed on the Celestial Empress, and I still don't understand why they're here. None of us do. I've spent countless nights discussing theories with Marina over smuggled vodka. Thomas has researched maritime history, searching for patterns. Derek has analyzed every piece of evidence we've collected. Claire, before she finally transferred to a land-based position, tried to interview the permanents directly, though they rarely answered, and when they did, their words were cryptic. "We never left," Eleanor once told her. "How could we? This is where we belong." But what does that mean? Did they die here, their final moments so traumatic that their spirits couldn't move on? The Atlantic Star sank, taking Gregory Walsh and 147 others with it. Perhaps their connection to the sea was so strong that even death couldn't sever it. Or maybe it's simpler. Maybe they loved this life so much. The performances, the endless horizons, the freedom of the ocean, that they chose to stay. Refused the finality of death. Traded eternal rest for eternal voyages. Marina believes the ships themselves are to blame. "They're like tape recorders," she says. "Every moment, every emotion, every soul that passes through gets recorded. The ships remember, and some recordings are stronger than others." Thomas thinks it's the sea. The ocean has always been a graveyard. Thousands of ships, millions of lives lost. All that death, all that energy, it has to go somewhere. Maybe it collects in vessels like this. Maybe we're sailing through a maritime afterlife. I have my own theory. I think they're warnings, echoes of what will become if we stay too long. The ship doesn't just record, it claims. And once it has enough of you, enough performances, enough memories, enough essence recorded, you can't leave. You become permanent. The question isn't why they stayed. It's whether we can still escape. Part 6. Act 5. Learning to Coexist. Part B. English version. But we can't escape. Not yet. Contracts bind us. Bills need paying. And part of me wonders if leaving would even matter anymore. So we've learned to coexist. We've developed rules, unspoken guidelines that keep us safe, or at least keep us sane. Never perform on Deck 7 after midnight. The bride owns those hours, and disturbing her grief brings consequences. Derek once had to inventory supplies there at 1 a.m. He hasn't spoken about what he saw, but his hair turned gray at the temples overnight. Don't count the audience during shows. If your numbers don't match the manifest, don't question it, just perform. Eleanor will be there. so will the others. Acknowledge them with a subtle nod, but never call attention to their presence. Leave Samuel's piano alone. He plays from 2 to 4 a.m. every night. The maintenance staff tried to lock the jazz lounge once. The door was found torn from its hinges the next morning, though security footage showed nothing but darkness and the sound of furious jazz. Give Gregory Walsh the starboard railing at dawn. Stand anywhere else. He needs that spot, that view. One morning, a passenger tried to claim it. The man fell overboard an hour later. They never found his body. The Hastings have Sunset Bar from 7 to 8 p.m. We redirect passengers, claim it's reserved for a private event. Most people don't question it. Those who insist on entering leave quickly, talking about the cold and strange feeling. We've become facilitators of the impossible. We protect the living from the permanent, and perhaps we protect the permanent from the living. Marina calls us bridge keepers, standing between two worlds, belonging fully to neither. It's exhausting, but it's survival. And survival is all we have left. Tonight is my 7-year anniversary on the Celestial Empress. 7 years to the day. Vincent threw a small celebration in the crew mess. Cake, champagne, the usual speeches about dedication and service. Marina hugged me. Thomas shook my hand. Derek clapped me on the shoulder. But when I returned to my cabin, I found something waiting. A photograph, placed carefully on my pillow. It showed the Constellation Lounge. The stage was lit. A performer stood at the microphone. The audience filled every seat. The photo was dated March 2011, 4 years before the ship even launched. 7 years before I joined the crew. The performer had my face. I stood there staring at it, my hands trembling. Then I heard them. All of them. Outside my door, in the corridor. I could hear Eleanor's heels clicking on the floor. Gregory Walsh's briefcase latching. The Hastings whispering to each other. Little Henry's toy boat dragging across the carpet. Samuel humming a jazz melody. I opened the door. They were all there. Every single permanent, standing in a semicircle in the hallway, watching me, waiting. Eleanor stepped forward, that patient smile on her face. She reached out and placed something in my hand. A performer's badge, vintage, from 1955. My name was engraved on it. My photograph embedded in the brass. "Welcome home, Julian," she whispered. When I looked up, they were gone. But I could still feel them in the walls, in the floors, in every corner of the ship. And when I walked to the mirror, I saw it. My reflection was slightly off. A half-second delay. Like watching a recording of myself, rather than a true reflection. I'm already becoming an echo, a recording, a permanent. The ship has claimed me. So here I am, 7 years later, still performing, still sailing, still living this impossible life between worlds. My contract expired months ago. I could leave. Thomas finally retired last year, moved to Colorado, bought a cabin in the mountains. He still emails sometimes. Short messages. He says he sees Walsh standing on his porch at dawn, Eleanor sitting in the local theater, the Hastings holding hands in restaurant windows. The ship doesn't let go, he wrote, even thousands of miles from the ocean. Claire got married, settled in Ohio. She called me once, crying. She'd seen the Hastings at her wedding, standing in the back row of the church, smiling. She hung up before I could respond. She hasn't called since, but I haven't left. I tell myself it's the money, the stability, the life I've built here. But that's a lie. The truth is simpler and more terrifying. I don't know if I can leave, I don't know if there's enough of me left that isn't already recorded, already permanent, already belonging to the ship. Last night I performed Fly Me to the Moon one more time. Eleanor applauded. The others watched. And when I looked out at the audience, I saw someone new in the back row. A young man, maybe 25, with a guitar case. He was staring at the stage with that look I remember. Excitement, wonder, dreams of adventure. He looked exactly like I did 7 years ago. I wanted to warn him, to tell him to run, but what would I say? That cruise ships collect souls? That the ocean never forgets? That some passengers check in but never check out? Would he even believe me? The show must go on. It always goes on, forever and ever and ever. Welcome aboard.